Well, welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Miles Richardson, and I'm here with.
Isaac Sladen, good to be with you all today.
Yes, we're so excited to be here. And if you were with us last time, we were talking about the story of creation. And if
Yeah.
you remember, we kind of left off and everything was perfect. Like
Yeah.
everything was
Yeah.
great. Life was going good.
Yeah.
And then we reach our topic for the day. Which is sin. And it's
Yeah.
kind of a harder conversation, maybe, but it gives us a lot of insight into why the world looks kind of the way that it does
Yeah.
today. Because we come in on this story of just sin and what
Yeah.
it is and how it got here.
And how it entered the world. Like, I like how you said it's kind of a hard shift. Like,
Yeah.
all right, here's the perfect world. Boom, sin enters
Yeah.
the world. Everything has changed. I think it's important to know that we today, and this is hard to remember. I have to remind myself of this often. Like, sin should be something that we take seriously
Yes. Yeah.
in our lives. And it's not a thing of like, oh, this person is sinning worse than me. Different sins have different consequences. But sin is ultimately, it's sin, and all of it's disobedience to God. And so it's something that we should take seriously
Yeah.
in our lives for sure. So
Yeah.
this is a good next stop for us here on our flyover plan
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So we kind of go from creation to the sin comes in, and you're like,
Mhm.
how did we take this? Like, we just everything changed. What
Yeah,
happened?
yeah.
But when we kind of look in the story, what we see is Adam and Eve are in the garden, and all of a
Mhm.
sudden a serpent just kind of comes into
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
And we see that there's this tree in the garden, right? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and it's like the one tree that Adam and Eve can't eat from. And
Yeah.
the serpent comes in and is like, "Hey, but like, are you sure God really told
Yeah.
you that you can't eat from there?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
but it might taste good, you know?"
Yeah.
And they go for it.
Mhm.
They just go for it. The one tree that they can't eat
Yeah.
from.
Yeah. I think that's like a depiction. Like Satan still uses that method today, I think.
Yeah.
In certain areas of our life, like people may have different struggles than others. And so I think Satan attacks in that exact same area. Like, does God really say that? Like,
Yeah.
it's really not that bad. Like if you do that thing like that, that's not really gonna cause harm. And he
Right.
really twists with your mind.
Right.
And we see that he does that to even in the story.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So they end up eating from the tree, and we see that almost immediately, like the relationship is broken.
Yeah.
They realize all of a sudden, like they're naked and
Mhm.
ashamed, and
Yeah.
God's like, "What's going on?" And they're hiding from God.
Yeah.
And we see that like sin at its base level is just this disobedience to
Mhm.
God, and it brings this broken relationship. And
Yeah.
ultimately, though, we see that sin brings death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as a result of their actions, this bleeds to us now.
Yeah.
And all of humanity
Yeah.
has that broken relationship with God. And so, kind of like how we said back to the beginning, it's really like a hard shift. Like, it's not
Right.
just, oh, they messed up a little bit. Like, all of humanity
Yeah.
has this broken relationship
Yeah.
with God now
Yeah.
that needs to be restored, and that needs help. Like
Yeah.
we need to get back to communion with God. But that's where we see hope.
Yeah.
In this a little bit after in this story.
Yeah. When we see kind of sin come into the play, but then we fast forward a little bit in chapter 3, we reach verse 15,
Mhm.
and we see this hope come into play. And I just want to read verse 15. It
Yeah.
says, "And I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and
Mhm.
you will strike his heel." And I love the way that you said it.
Yeah.
This is snake crusher,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, Saint Crusher, Serpent Crusher,
Serpent
is
crusher.
what we see in come into play. But I think for us, this brings like hope
Yeah.
in our lives. Like we see, okay, we have this broken relationship with God
Mm-hmm.
because of sin, but God wants a relationship with us.
Right.
God wants hope for us. God wants to restore us. He wants to redeem us. And that's where this serpent crusher comes into play. It says,
Mhm.
he will strike your head and you will strike his heel. Like
Yeah.
the person that's going to redeem us is going to
Mhm.
strike the serpent's head. It's going to
Mhm.
kill him. Like
Mhm.
we will have victory, and we can have victory
Mhm.
in that. So I think, it's a perfect picture, honestly, of
Mhm.
hope for
Yeah.
us. We see this broken relationship, and then we see someone who's going to redeem us. And so
Yes.
it really makes me excited to think about in this story.
Yeah.
And for anyone, who's listening, maybe you haven't heard this story before, or
Yeah.
you just getting into this portion, it's not all just like bad and broken and things like that. Like we
Yeah.
have hope. We have an opportunity
Yeah.
to be redeemed
Yeah.
and back to communion and relationship with God.
Yeah, and I love too. You said, we have someone who's going to crush the head of the serpent. the entire Bible points to Jesus. And
Yeah.
you're going to hear us say that a ton throughout this podcast. But like,
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're pointing to is the New Testament story of Jesus coming to this earth, living a sinless life, dying
Yeah.
on the cross, paying for the sins. That is the crushing, because
Yeah.
that's what gives us that relationship with God. And yet we see it all the way in Genesis,
Yeah.
from the initial, like, oops, I ate the fruit. Oh,
Mhm.
sin is here. And God's like, you know what? We got this.
I got you.
I got you. Jesus is coming.
I'm
Don't
bringing
even
hope
worry
for
about
you.
it. And
Yeah.
that's the hope that we have.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah. It's super encouraging to
Yeah,
see for sure.
yeah. Well, as we kind of wrap up today, I do just want to leave you guys with this question, which is, where do you find hope when faced with like evil in the world? Because I
Yeah.
think that it's hard, and I think that Genesis 3 points directly to Jesus. But
Yeah.
maybe you haven't read that story, maybe you haven't read the Bible for yourself, and that's what I would encourage you guys in is like go read this for yourself,
Yeah.
because maybe you are struggling with a hard time. Sin is prevalent in the world, but we can have hope through
Mhm.
it. We can have hope because of
Yeah.
the story.
Yeah. And sometimes I think, especially like today, the age that we live in, it's kind of hard to really know, okay, where do I put my hope in, like in
Yeah.
general, like
Yeah.
when I'm faced with a hard situation or anything, because social media plays into that now. Like there's all these different things that you could put your focus on and put your hope in. But like you said, Genesis 3 tells us where our hope should go, the
Yeah.
serpent crusher, which is ultimately Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's how we, get back into a relationship with God. And so I think that's a
Yeah.
great question to end on, to have us thinking for ourselves in our daily life, but also the people out there who maybe are hearing this story for the very first time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, Isaac, thanks
Yeah.
for sitting down
Yeah,
with us.
thank you.
Guys, make sure that you follow us on our YouTube.
Yes.
Check out our Instagram. It's High Street YTH.
Yeah.
We'll be getting these out on a regular basis. Hit us with a like, a follow,
Yeah.
maybe even hit us with a comment if you have a
Yes.
question, and
Yeah.
we'll see you guys next time.
Sounds good. See ya.